Good morning and welcome to the seminar EU Taxonomy, Potential Relevance for Sustainable Finance in Latin America and the Caribbean. My name is Isabel Montojo. I am a consultant at HPL and I will guide you through today's event. Before we start, a few ground rules for the event. Voy a compartir a continuación en pantalla algunas normas de participación.
Now let me share some participation rules.
All microphones and cameras of the audience will remain off during the session. English and Spanish interpretation is available, so please click on the world icon on the lower part of your screen and select the language in which you wish to listen to the seminar. We have set aside some time in the end for the audience to ask questions, so please submit your questions using the Zoom chat option. A reminder that this session is being recorded. Thanks to everyone for your participation. Today's hosts representing KFW and ALIDE are Claudia Arce and Edgardo Álvarez, who will share with us some introductory remarks. Let me leave you with Claudia Arce, Director of Latin America and the Caribbean at KFW Development Bank. Welcome, Claudia.
Yeah, hello to everybody. Dear all, I'm really happy to welcome you to this webinar. The taxonomy for sustainable finance. It sounds complex, and I tell you it is complex. But the background behind this is very simple. It's mainly two things. First, to give more transparency to investors on green assets, on investments in green assets. And second, to avoid greenwashing, which has become an issue in some parts. So why it is so relevant? It's not only relevant for us here in the EU because it's called the EU taxonomy, but it seems it's also relevant for people in Bogota, for people in Lima, for people in Rio, although it has been cooked far away in Brussels. So the core idea of taxonomy is very simple. It's how to define green and how to define sustainable. And to be able to tell how a concrete investment contributes to saving our climate. The EU is not the first to do this. Others have done before. Probably you all know the International Capital Market Association with its green bond principles, the Climate Bond Initiative, and each and every issuer of a green bond defines today what is green. But what is different? I think the EU is the first to put this into a comprehensive regulatory framework. And this is new, it's a new benchmark. So the EU taxonomy is, so to say, pioneering. And being a pioneer, that's also what development banks, many of us today here in the plenary and in the audience are coming from development banks. We want to pioneer new things. So this is really laying the groundwork for this new benchmark. And if we take the Paris Agreement seriously, we, the development banks, have to take sustainable finance to another level than today. Not only in volume, but also in content. So we are not only financiers, we have to become enablers of sustainable finance, and we have to become market makers to make things changing. And I can say a lot of things are happening already. So for example, the KFW flagship project for green capital market developments in Latin America will be launched at the upcoming COP in Glasgow. It's the so-called Latin America Green Bond Fund, LA Green. It was set up with capital from the German government and the EU, and we hope that additional investors will join this fund soon. The core purpose of this fund is to support additional supply of high quality green bonds from Latin America and enable sustainable finance. Another initiative is definitely the Colombian example, and Colombia is very much developing their own national instruments. I think my colleague will tell you much more about this later on. And we are proud to participate together with IDB, AFD, and others in the first multi-sectoral policy-based loan for sustainable development in Colombia. So these are only two examples of recent new instruments and products in the market to really push green financing and green bonds. And I think we all will learn a lot more today. And I'm very happy to share this panel with friends and allies in this very important journey. So thank you all for being here today. I think we have more than 250 people joining this webinar. This is really overwhelming. We didn't expect before that so many people will join it. So thanks for joining. Put your questions in the chat. We hope that we can all have a good dialogue together. And I'm very much looking forward to the next 1.5 hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Now let me introduce Edgardo Alvarez, ALIDE's Secretary General. Welcome, Edgardo. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Isabel. Good morning to the participants from various Latin American, Caribbean, and North American institutions, and good afternoon to those from banks and organizations from the European Union. On behalf of ALIDE, I wish to cordially welcome you to our seminar, European Taxonomy, Possible Implications for Sustainable Finance in Latin America and the Caribbean, which has been organized jointly with KFW, an esteemed German Development Bank member of our association. Thank you for your interest and participation in this virtual meeting, which has brought together, as Claudia said, over 250 participants. In today's difficult context deriving from coronavirus pandemic, with its unprecedented negative impact on global health, economic activities, employment, restricted mobility, and worsened by the severe effects of climate change, the way in which that change is confronted is a matter of extreme importance to our region. It is our sincere opinion that the European Union taxonomy, as the first, and I quote, first regulated sustainable finance classification system in the world, constitutes a new international reference for separating what is green from what is not. It offers to different actors, enterprises, and investors definitions of the economic activities that can be classified as being environmentally sustainable. Almost all the development finance institutions in our region, in one way or another, have created green and environmental programs oriented toward ensuring sustainability. We can cite programs for sustainable transport, renewable energy, organic production, soil conservation, deforestation, and sustainable housing, among others. It is precisely to identify and incentivize these activities. That's why ALIDE annually distinguish the good practices of these financial institutions about products that have to do with safeguarding the environment. And it was for that purpose that we institute the ALIDE Green Prize in 2010. The development banking agenda must be continuously adjusted to existing conditions to the environment in which ALIDE
en las que opera ALIDE, y por eso queremos servir como un foro para analizar distintos temas inherentes a la finanza verde. Quisiera cerrar deseándoles
and that later will contribute to the development of national taxonomies in Latin America and the Caribbean, and to build a more environmentally friendly world for the present and future generations. Welcome once again, and thank you for your attention. Bye.
Thanks so much, Edgardo. Now I have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Caroline Vellemans, Unit Head of Sustainable Finance Policy at the Directorate General for International Partnerships of the European Commission. Caroline, welcome to our seminar.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Many thanks for inviting me to contribute to the opening of this webinar. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. And this webinar is extremely timely and relevant. Indeed, trillions of euros are needed every year to meet the objective of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. And the COVID-19 crisis has added to the urgency. Financing needs have become even more pressing to build back better and in all regions of the world. In the EU, as you may know, an ambitious strategic growth agenda, the European Green Deal, is guiding our actions to meet our sustainability goals. And the European Green Deal aims at making the Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050 and protecting
para el 2050 y para proteger la biodiversidad. Las finanzas sostenibles es uno de nuestros activos más importantes.
System more sustainable. And this requires both financial legislation and frameworks and a clear transitioning path for businesses to help ensure financial flows support the overall policy direction. Regulators need to set the targets and provide clarity on the direction of travel. In that respect, taxonomies and disclosure are key tools to direct green investments, and it is beneficial to both investors and issuers. For investors, it helps them to identify truly green finance opportunity and provide them with a transparent and credible list of prospective green investments. Taxonomy provides appropriate signals and more certainty to economic actors and protect investors, therefore, by avoiding the risk of greenwashing. For issuers, taxonomy helps them by providing clear principles or requirements that they need to fulfill so that their activity can be considered environmentally sustainable. So the EU, what have we done? The EU has already taken major steps to build a sustainable finance ecosystem, as it was mentioned early on. The EU taxonomy is indeed a central piece of this ecosystem, of this sustainable finance ecosystems. And the EU taxonomy provides a robust science-based tools for companies, investors, and public authorities to identify what it is considered as sustainable. So it consists of an EU-wide classification system for environmentally sustainable activities in line with our 2050 climate neutral objective. So the EU taxonomy, together with the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation for financial market participants and financial advisors, and the new proposal for corporate sustainability reporting directive are really the foundation here in the EU to increase transparency and provide tools for investors to identify sustainable investment opportunity. The EU taxonomy is at the heart of the development of other tools on sustainable finance, such as the EU Green Bond Standard and the EU Eco Label for retail financial products. Alors, an activity is considered sustainable according to the EU taxonomy if the activity contributes substantially to one of the 6 environmental objectives, being climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention and control, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. The activity should also not significantly harm any other environmental objective and should be carried out in compliance with minimum social safeguards. So it is important to understand that the taxonomy is not a list of good or bad companies, nor is it a mandatory list of activity that investors have to invest in. Not at all, it's just a guide. And the only legally constraining element is the requirement disclosure to market participants and large companies. I will come to that later on in the speech. So where were we in the EU in the development of this taxonomy? The development is work in progress. So for the time being, the technical criteria for the 2 first environmental objectives have been adopted. So for climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, we have now the set of criteria that have been adopted. In the first half of 2022, the Commission will adopt the technical criteria for the remaining 4 environmental objectives. So this means water, circulation economy, pollution prevention, and the biodiversity. Also, whilst the taxonomy for the time being focused really on green, the Commission is working on a social taxonomy. And a draft report on a social taxonomy was published in July 2021 by the Platform on Sustainable Finance, and the assessment of the feedback on this report is now ongoing. So you know, this Platform on Sustainable Finance provide advice and recommendation to the Commission on the specific criteria for the taxonomy. So the EU taxonomy is, as I said, a living tool, and it will continue to evolve over time with more and more activities being added under its scope as the time evolves, but also the technology. So not everything which is not included in the taxonomy is unsustainable. This is important to understand. And the taxonomy will be expanded and updated as technology and policy evolve. For example, the taxonomy framework will be extended in order to recognize better credible transition efforts. And by the end of 2021, the Commission will also assess the provision required to cover economic activity that do not have a significant impact on environmental sustainability, so what we call light green activities, and economic activities that significantly harm environmental sustainability. So this is the state of play of where we are in the development of the EU taxonomy. Now, who needs to report against the taxonomy? EU large financial and non-financial companies will have to disclose what we call a green asset ratio, which is the percentage of their activity that are taxonomy compliant. And this green asset ratio, it is important to understand that this green asset ratio will also have to cover the non-EU exposure activities. Other market participants can use the taxonomy on a voluntary basis to show they have reached a level of environmental performance that financial markets recognize as green. So in this way, the taxonomy provides incentive to gradually increase the share of green economic activities to attract more and new investors, and as such helps both companies and investors to accelerate the transition to sustainability. But all these efforts on developing taxonomy cannot take place in a vacuum. Global challenges call for global and coordinated responses. So to mobilize international investors and to scale up cross-border green investment flow, there is a real need to promote integrated market for environmentally sustainable finance. So this means developing coordinated approach and coherent sustainable finance frameworks, tools across the globe, in particular when they are key to enable investors to identify green investment opportunity across the globe. So it is indeed super important for taxonomy that we develop coherent framework across the globe to facilitate cross-border capital flows into green projects, but also to reduce transaction costs. This is a concern shared by the international community already, including by the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which was relaunched recently by the Italian G20 presidency, but as well as by the International Platform on Sustainable Finance, the IPSF. The IPSF also contributes to a deeper integration of taxonomy. Its subgroup, so within the IPSF, there is a subgroup called Taxonomy Working Group, co-chaired by the EU and China. And this working group will publish in November a report on a common ground taxonomy based on a comparison between China and the EU. The objective of the common ground taxonomy is to provide clarity on some of the de facto commonalities between existing taxonomy in IPSF jurisdictions. In this regard, it is also very encouraging to see that many of our partner countries around the world, including in Latin America and the Caribbean, have started to develop sustainable finance tools and frameworks, and that the EU taxonomy can inspire and provide guidance, inspiration to these countries, as I believe our esteemed panelists will show during the panel. So to help to scale up finance in low and middle income countries, the Commission has also announced that it plans to develop a comprehensive EU global sustainable finance strategy, a strategy really to scale up sustainable finance in our partner countries, and that it will rely on the work of a high-level expert group that will therefore inform the Commission on transformational actions that the EU can take. So let me also take this opportunity to remind you as well that we are also providing technical assistance to our partner countries through our TAIEX program, the EU's Global Technical Assistance and Information Exchange Instrument, celebrating already 20 years this year. So how can the green bond market be further promoted, and how we link this with the EU taxonomy? So the taxonomy is of course crucial to define what it is sustainable and what it is not. If we want to scale up sustainable finance further, we also believe that we need to promote sustainable related financial instruments to help direct and mobilize capital for green and sustainable projects. This is why the EU is also supporting the development of green and social bonds across the world. It is well to note, it is good to mention also that the EU has is still financing an important share of its recovery program Next Generation EU via green and social bonds. Even though it has been demonstrated that green and social bonds can play a crucial role in a sustainable recovery worldwide, the potential is still largely untapped. Green and social bonds issuance still represent only a very small share of the overall bond issuance worldwide, and emerging and developing economies are especially lagging behind. The EU is therefore exploring how to scale up sustainable finance and how to promote the development of green and social bonds further, including in our partner countries. We are working on an initiative which will support our partner countries to mobilize institutional investors to finance through green and social bonds their environmental and social projects, and thereby promote a sustainable recovery. At the same time, this initiative will help our partner countries to develop credible green and social bond frameworks while taking into account, to the extent it is feasible, our EU sustainable finance frameworks. So the EU is also supporting, as you know, the development of the green bond market in Latin America and the Caribbean through the Latin America Green Bond Fund, La Green initiative. It is very encouraging to see that La Green intends to move local and regional green bond market actors towards aligning with EU green bond standards and guidelines. As Latin America and Caribbean public development banks, you are
como Banco de Desarrollo Públicos de América Latina y el Caribe, ustedes están contribuyendo a la recuperación y a la aplicación de esta estrategia, y los felicito por sus esfuerzos de apoyar el desarrollo de una taxonomía y el desarrollo
of green and sustainable bonds. Rest assured that we stand ready to support you in such effort. I'm convinced that the exchange today will be rich. I wish you all an excellent and fruitful webinar and look forward to continuing this stimulating dialogue with your institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caroline, for these last encouraging words, especially. The time has come now to start today's panel, and I am pleased to introduce our moderator today, Kurt Vogt, who is director of LAGREEN, which is Latin America Green Bond Fund, precisely the fund that Caroline was mentioning. And he's also managing director of HPL, a sustainable finance advisory firm with operations in Latin America. Before I give Kurt the floor, I would like to remind all of you that after the panel, we will have some time for a Q&A session. So please submit your questions using the chat box. And as you have any questions, you can just type them in the chat box so that in the end, we have a list from which we can choose the questions. And nothing else on my side. Kurt, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. Hi, everyone. I want to thank KFW and ALIDE for inviting me to participate in this event. Following the introductions from Claudia and Edgardo and the excellent keynote speech from Caroline, we are now ready to start our next segment. In this panel, we will explore the relevance of the EU taxonomy in particular, and we'll discuss the more general context and drivers behind the development of sustainable finance in Latin America and the Caribbean. To do so, I feel really honored to moderate a discussion among key players in the region who see these questions from the following vantage points. No? The first one from an European development finance institution perspective, represented by Claudia Arce, the Director of Latin America and the Caribbean for KFW. The second one, the investor perspective, that will be represented by Alfredo Mordeschi, Head of Latin America Fixed Income and Santander Asset Management. The third one is the issuer and local development bank perspective, represented in this case by Bianca Nasser, CFO at Bnds. Then we have the fourth one, the sovereign issuer and government perspective, represented by Cesar Arias, Director of Public Credit and National Treasury in the Ministry of Finance in Colombia. And finally, last but not least, the regional DFI perspective, represented by Maria Neto, who is Financial Markets Principal Specialist, Connectivity and Markets, and Finance Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB. So let's get started. Let me start with Claudia. Let me just say that KFW is one of the world's largest green bond issuers and is committed to supporting green capital market development, as she already mentioned, in Latin America on behalf of the German government and the EU. So my question to you, Claudia, is what role does the EU taxonomy play for KFW plans with partners in the region?
Thank you, Kurt. So yeah, where to start? I think, like Caroline just said, the EU taxonomy definitely is a new benchmark. And it's also the basis for the recently launched EU Green Bond Standard. So it's ambitious, it's very ambitious if you look at it. And to some extent, it's also EU-centric. And I must say, I mean, we have discussed it internally in KFW several times, and it's quite challenging also for a bank like KFW as a very big issuer of green bonds. But I think probably it has to be that challenging because we just heard we want to become climate neutral in 2050, and we really need this giant efforts to become it, because until now only little has happened, and I think it's the right direction, and this new benchmark definitely will give a push in this direction. But what does it mean for our partners? Because systems are different from EU in the different regions and also in Latin America. So I couldn't agree more with Caroline to to say it should inspire and it should give a guidance for the own efforts. And I think at least what we were seeing when we discussed it with our partners in Latin America, a lot of the criteria, thresholds also work for Latin America. Some don't, but many of them work. And I think the first step and the most important step in the market will be to create much more transparency on the different standards and on the definition of green. So in 2020, we already started the experiment and we started talking on technical screening criteria to some of our partners. And what we have first seen when we were looking at this, that we definitely have to adapt the impact monitoring frameworks because we need more flexibility to handle it. Another thing when we were talking it was a big challenge was the availability of data. So I think that's a very first important step to make more data available. And then with this data, you can try to monitor and can try to align to the own taxonomies in the countries. We have just heard there are many taxonomies being developed, but also with regard to coherence to the EU taxonomy. And yeah, another fact is that the technical data is quite detailed. So I mean, the first two areas and objectives, climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, where the criteria were recently published. I mean, it's like more than 250 pages of criteria. So it's really complex. And also what we have seen, it doesn't fully and always make sense in other countries. To give you an example, in the criteria list for energy, for electricity, the transformer specifications, they make sense only for 50 Hertz systems. In many countries, we have 60 Hertz systems. So we have to talk on that and see how this can be adapted. And I think you will find other cases like this. Nevertheless, we want to continue to use the taxonomy and we want to help to roll out elements of this taxonomy also in the partner countries and also in our core loan portfolio. So I think it definitely helps to improve comparability, to improve transparency, and to improve ambition. So how did we go for this? And I think here I really should congratulate IDB because IDB has done a fantastic job in launching the Green Bonds Transparency Platform, and we were very happy to join this. I think that's a very, very first important step to make data available, make data transparent, and it will very much help to all the American market participants to join this boat and to develop the standards and the criteria. So KFW and the German government, we were one of the first to endorse this new platform. Then also it has already been said, La Green should help because La Green is not only a fund for investment, it also brings along technical assistance. And with this technical assistance, we can develop, help to develop the availability of data, the transparency, and to start adapting taxonomies in the concrete case. So I think this is at least as helpful as the financing as such to have these possibilities to use technical assistance. And then I think we also have to explore new financial instruments with our partners beyond loans to support green capital market development. So I think guarantees and credit risk enhancement, partial risk issuances, many of us could act as anchor investment and anchor investors for new issuances. And we can also, to some extent, probably help cost sharing arrangement cost for small and new issuers. So I think bringing it together to the point, there is a whole pool of possibilities and instruments we can use together as development banks to kind of make the change and bringing more green capital into it.
Great, Claudia. I think just as a follow-up question, I mean, clearly development banks can do a lot to make a difference for the development of the market. And who do you consider your natural allies to achieve this? Just as a quick follow-up question.
I just said in my introductory remarks, I think development banks are pioneers in all the markets. And I mean, having ALIDE here, I mean, all the development banks, all the important local development banks are there. So I think, first of all, they are natural partners because they are ahead when it comes to pioneering new instruments. And second, also the governments, because without the governments, it would not work. You need them to set up the regulation, you need them to set up the laws. And I think these are our two main partners. And I really think, I mean, I think it was said the volume in Latin America of green financing, green bonds is still very small. It's only 3% of the green bonds, of the total emission of the green bonds. So I think we can play together this role of pushing it forward. And last but not least, I think also the regional players like IDB have a very important impact on developing this more partners. So these are our partners, and with these partners, we hope to get private issuers and investors to push it ahead.
Great, Claudia. And talking about partners, no. Let's start talking to them in the rest of the panel. There are your partners, and so let's now talk to one that is very important with Bianca, and let's talk about the largest sustainable finance market in the region, which is Brazil. No, it has the largest bond market in terms of in Latin America, and it has a thematic debentures, it has infrastructure debentures, green agribusiness receivable certificates, and other sustainable finance instruments. And all this has been developed there. And a big portion of the country private sector has stepped into sustainable finance. So Bianca, do you see the EU taxonomy as a role model for Brazil to keep pushing the sustainability agenda through finance? Other comments that you would like to bring, Bianca? Thank you.
Sure, Kurt. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the opportunity to be here representing Bnds and also Brazil, as you mentioned during the question, not only in terms of the market size, we are relevant for all the green assets, but also we see the country as a potential to really develop a relevant portion of the green assets to be introduced in the international market in the near future. And in that sense, definitely the taxonomy discussion, it's really relevant that I can point some comments here about Brazil, but also about Bnds itself as an example about all the needs that we need in terms of the needs that we have to develop these methodologies and ways of report and things like that, so far during the panel, we could hear very interesting and relevant information about the importance of this kind of movement that we are seeing in the world, that not only we see that from the investor side some kind of demand and need for that, but we also need to have some kind of monitoring policy in that sense in order to avoid greenwashing and things like that. So what we see in terms of the relevance of EU taxonomy to Brazil, I would say that first I would mention like to really considering how this this topic it's really being a concern for Europe, we see as a really important relevant benchmark to all the methodologies that we are developing, not only internally in Brazil but also in Bnds. So if we take some examples about methodologies that we are applying to measure our information and our numbers, and also what we are needing to report internally in the country, we see how the EU taxonomy was used as a benchmark to build this kind of methodologies. I can give you as an example the recent policy that was announced by the Brazilian Central Bank, that it's under kind of public discussion nowadays related to climate impact, and that it has reference in the EU taxonomy. I can point, for example, how Bnds used to measure its credit portfolio in terms of percentage dedicated to green, that is follow a methodology created by the Brazilian Bank Association, also being based on the EU taxonomy. And we could see as well, like the demand and the issuances made by Bnds, both in the international market and in the local market. We could see that it was based on the green bond and the internal green local notes. Both of them was based on the International Capital Market Association principles. And in that sense, we know how it's connected. We do see as well in all the, I would say, the cooperation that we have with other institutions abroad, especially with the IDFC, that all the methodologies that we discuss, then the ways of reports that it's under debate nowadays, it's also taking consideration the EU taxonomy. But we also see some challenges on that sense. And I would say that the challenges from ourselves as a bank itself, and considering the specific way that Bnds provide loans in Brazil, I would say that we have the challenge to how we're going to measure what we call here the indirect loans that is dedicated to small and medium companies, and how to link these loans as a sustainable asset. It's one of the challenges, and how to get information about it. Part of the challenges that we are facing now, I think that it was already mentioned here in the panel, is that to go beyond the green. So how are we going to measure other areas related to sustainable assets, like education, like health system, and also as related to small and medium company, it's another concern. And Bnds has already actually announced a sustainable framework, adding these topics in addition to the green assets. So I would say that so far we still have a lot to do and to improve on that sense. And we need at some way to try to have some kind of standardization of different kinds and taxonomies being used around the world. But definitely the EU taxonomy, we believe that it's still going to be considered as a relevant benchmark to all this discussion, and it's going to be a need to all the financial Brazilian companies and financial institutions in Brazil to also tap the international market, especially the European market, that I believe that is going to give value, the value that is being given to this kind of report and information is going to increase. So I think that that's the message that we are discussing nowadays in Brazil and Bnds.
Yeah, Bianca, you are hitting the nail on the head. It's true, no? Like, you are sitting on one side of the table, and somebody, and thank you for all your comments. On the other hand, you have investors, right? And this is exactly what we're going to talk right now. No? How does the EU taxonomy play a role for a European investor like Santander Asset Management? No? And this brings us to talk to Alfredo, who runs a Latin American and Caribbean investment grade fund, which is focused on ESG. And Alfredo, I mean, the needs of your fund is to comply with that regulation. And I think it would be very illustrative if you, Alfredo, can describe what it is, what you need to do, and and how to incorporate all this into your investment process. Go ahead, Alfredo.
Hi, well, thank you for the invitation, and I'm very glad to offer the point of view of a particular investor, because it's a Luxembourg fund, so we have to report as a European fund, but our point of interest as an investor is Latin America. So we are, I think, very well joining these two main issues that we covered today. So we have to say, and I'm going to subscribe 100% to what Claudia Arce was mentioning about the useful of the taxonomy is it brings transparency, it brings comparability, and it brings ambition. I'm gonna take these words because it's very important for us. I'm gonna add that it provides an anchor to the conversation that we have with the issuers. If you are analyzing, I mean, a company from an ESG point of view, you already made your homework and you understand what is material on a particular sector, and you're going to ask a lot of questions, but you need a sort of reference. And so I'm going to concentrate in particular in the taxonomy, not on the activities that are excluded, which are, I mean, really not taken into account, but the ones that are included, but provide some sort of reference, some sort of threshold that needs to be present in order to be considered aligned with the taxonomy. And if you allow me, Kurt, I'm going to share my screen for a very quick example. Let's hope it works, because I mean, we okay, this is so it's going to be really quick, and I put in an example on the manufacturing of cement, which is very significant, a very significant activity in Latin America, and also it's very significant in terms of its contribution to GHG emissions in worldwide. No? So I'm taking directly from the taxonomy. This is a website that is very, very useful and very practical to check on the particular activities. And the definition speaks for 722 kilos of CO2 per product, per ton of gray cement clinker produced. That's going to be the threshold. So we have I just took one company in Latin America, probably the biggest one, very, very relevant and very much committed to being aligned with the target of reducing their CO2 emissions. And as you know, I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, on the production of cement is really, I mean, it entails a lot of investment to actually reduce the CO2. So we have, this is a press release. I'm not really judging the company, but I really want to go into the examples to see how the taxonomy helps us assess, I mean, the ambition of a particular issuer. So in this particular case, we have, and I resume the example here, we have a target in 2030 of 475 kilos per ton of gray cement clinker produced in 2030. So we can run backward this example because it's also changed the target for 2025 for 520 kilos, which is a 35% reduction. So what we can do is ask ourselves, this announcement seems good, 40% seems like an interesting reduction, but how can we assess it? I mean, is it ambitious? Is it an easy target? So let's go to the taxonomy. The taxonomy sets 722 as a threshold, so we can assume a linear reduction in the next 5 years, and that means that the company is going to be EU aligned in 2022. So we think, yes, as a producer, that means that that is very, very relevant for us. I mean, the taxonomy is not expected to be something that you should invest or you shouldn't invest. It's something that you need to set help you set the conversation, anchor the conversation along different targets. And I think it's also useful for even for the issuers of sustainable link bonds. As Claudia and Caroline mentioned, I mean, avoiding greenwashing is an important objective, also very explicit in the EU. So here, I mean, one of the ways we can work towards avoiding greenwashing is by linking the SLBs, the sustainable linked bond, when we set the sustainable targets, align with the threshold that the EU provides. So if a company comes and says, I'm going to target a 10% reduction, 15% reduction, is this a lot? Is this very little? Well, let's compare it to the threshold that the EU is providing, and then we get a sense of how ambitious the target is. So as an investor, I think it is quite useful. I mean, and we really appreciate it. It really asks for a lot of work. It's not easy. I mean, we as investors, we need to disclose a lot of data that in Latin America are not hanging fruit. I mean, we really need to go through a lot of soul searching, even with our ESG data providers, in order to gather all this information from the issues. But it sets a threshold that is very, very useful for us.
Yeah, and there is a lot of science-based analysis behind the EU taxonomy, and I agree with you. It is very helpful to use that and have a benchmark to compare with, and really have a valuable conversation between investors and issuers. So that brings me, and thank you again, Alfredo. This was excellent. This brings me to the next issuer, and clearly a lot of the work falls in your hands, Alfredo, as an investor. But there's also a lot of work on the issuer side, and I would like to ask Cesar to talk a little bit about the Colombian sovereign, which is bound to be a very large participant in the sustainable finance space. In fact, the Ministry of Finance just announced recently, in July, their new green sovereign bond framework. So Cesar, can you please tell us a little bit about that, and how did you use, and if you used the taxonomy to come up with different use of proceeds that you put into those frameworks? Please give us a little bit of context. Go ahead, Cesar.
Well, good morning and good afternoon for those in Europe. Greetings from the Ministry of Finance. Thanks KFW, thanks ALIDE, thanks LaGreen for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, exchanging our experience and learning from you. Use of proceeds is precisely the most important aspect, both for issuers and for investors. The Colombian approach to use of proceeds has 5 main areas. First one, we made a decision deliberately to focus only on green expenditures on budget. And that is why we devised a system to be able to track every single budget, like the one that we're discussing now in Congress every October for the next year, is the place where we identify our green expenditures. The first sovereign portfolio will be of 27 projects, something around more than $500 million, 2 trillion pesos in the local currency, and in 6 categories that we can discuss later. The second decision that we made is that we were not going to include current green expenditures in our mix. We were only going to focus on capital expenditures, machinery, investment, research, development. And why is that? And I recommend the reading of the latest IMF report on the jobs and social multipliers of investment. They, for example, identify that one of the categories that has greater multipliers in investment is water sanitation, particularly in emerging countries and in low-income countries. It has multipliers that are 3 times as high in emerging markets, 5 times as high in low-income countries. We're proud to say that our green portfolio, our green bond framework, has a 40% concentration on water and sanitation, which is not surprised given the fact that Colombia is probably the 2nd or 3rd largest hydro-intensive country in the world. Third, we want to strike a balance between standardization and particularities in Colombia. For standardization, we took note and we ascribe to the green bond principle of the International Capital Market Association. And we wanted to focus on the greenness of the SDGs. Our favorite SDGs are number 6, water, number 13, climate action, number 14, life below water, and number 15, life on land. So we focus on the greenness of the 17 SDGs. And finally, to include the specificity, we're putting a big emphasis on the launching of the Colombian Green Taxonomy. Last Friday, we put up for comments all our technical documents, and they will be up for comments even for international investors in our website over the month of October until October the 8th. So those are, that is our approach, and I'm happy to go further. I don't want to go above my 4 minutes, but happy to go further in the next Q&A session.
Perfect, perfect. No, this is great, Cesar. So sovereign issues are a big player in the sustainable finance arena. So let's switch to Maria now. And you see the big fish, the big picture in sustainable finance for the whole region. So I think I mean, let's try to move a little bit quicker, but there is like a few insights that you might have about the evolution of the market, and maybe talk a little bit about the green bond platform that Claudia already touched on. But go ahead, Maria.
Thank you so much, Kurt. First of all, it's really a pleasure to be here because all of the partners here are our partners, including KFW, La Green, ALIDE, Bnds, and the government of Colombia, and yourself, Kurt. So it's very, very nice to be here with a lot of people who have been working together. I'm going to go very quickly because, as you said, we don't have a lot of time left, but to highlight some things. We started working in the American Development Bank with Latin America in the green bond market, I would say 2015-16, when we didn't have many issuances still in the region. We supported till today over 30% of the bonds issued in the region. And a bit from our experience, what have we seen in the movement? The market in the region has increased enormously. It has diversified. It started with renewable energy, and today we do see different sectors. I can talk after a bit of a report that we're about to launch with the Climate Bond Initiative about the state of the LAC bond markets, and we see that the market has evolved a lot and increased a lot since then. And also we see new sectors. I mean, as Cesar was mentioning, important sectors that are still to be improved, like water and sanitation and transport, taking increasingly more space. Now, at the same time, what do we see when we talk about the taxonomies? I think the experience from the European Union with the taxonomy is a very important one because it has provided, as some of you said, kind of a benchmark and a broad framework for what has to be presented. From our point of view, it's about greenwashing, but not really only. It's also about the greening. At the end of the day, what we want this market to do is to give some value, monetary value, and some valuation that those bonds that are thematic, and in particular, those that have a green impact can have also a better, let's say, pricing valuation in the market as well. We see this happening slowly, but it still as a question. So I want to provoke a bit this conversation as well on that side. What have we seen, let's say, as an interesting movement in the market? With the COVID crisis last year, we would have expected the markets to go down, but ironically, the thematic bond markets went up. And they went up because in a moment of crisis, a lot of the investors started associating good management of environmental and social governance as good governance and transparency, and started looking for the assets and the types of investments that are associated to that. And that's a fact. We see the market booming because of the investors having more interest about that. At the same time, we see an increasing number of issuers entering the market and doing things. However, we need to be careful precisely because as the market increases, how can we still ensure that the market keeps its integrity? And how can we make sure that we can create over the time this greenium, this sense that those projects, those investments that are associated to a green impact indeed will have this value in terms of impact. And there, I think what we've seen in the market is a couple of things in particular with regards to LAC. We just supported a report with the CBIs, the second one we are supporting on the reporting status of what has been done so far with these bonds. I think this is an important message because beyond the frameworks, when we started in 2015, we were working with many of you on trying to address the issue of taxonomies on what is the framework, what are the KPIs I have to demonstrate, how do I tell the story. But then we have now some issuers that already have a story to tell and that have to report about it. No? Worldwide, we had a very good news with this assessment with the CBI. About 77% of the issuers are actually reporting on their proceeds. However, only 59% of them are reporting on the impact, which is different, okay? So that's an indicator of things we still need to do. And unfortunately for Latin America, the reporting is not that good. We have 60% versus 70% in the world. What does it tell to us? We see the investors increasingly interested in the assets, but also becoming more and more, let's say, picky and with good reason to say, we want to make sure that if we are investing in this kind of bonds, that they have impacts that are positive, that we can have a clear understanding of what is done with the resources, and that is done integrally and transparently. So that's one of the reasons why the Inter-American Development Bank indeed launched the Green Bond Transparency Platform. The platform is an open platform, public platform, where all the issuers in Latin America and the Caribbean can report what they have been doing. And the importance of the platform, and is where we were actually even surprised, is that there is not many of those platforms in the world providing for this space where we can compare and demonstrate how different issuers are telling the story of what they are doing with the resources and what their impacts are. The platform has been trying now, in addition to open this space for the reporting, to promote comparability and promote also the possibility to aggregate data. How do we do that? We have been able to tag the issuers according to what kind of standards they are using, because there are many standards. We're going to talk about that, I know, in the next round of questions, so I'm happy to talk then. But I think one of the important things we are seeing there is that on the one hand, we need to help, and indeed a lot of the issuers in the region still are confused with the number of taxonomies and the confusion in the market around them. How can we offer them a space for doing that? But also, how can we work worldwide and also at the government level with the different countries to promote some kind of standardization and help the markets to be able to navigate all these different taxonomies that are appearing in the market. And so I think coming back again, taxonomies like the European Union provide a benchmark, but then it's very important for us to say how we translate those informations in a comparable way. And how can we help not only the issuers, but also the investors? And I'm talking not only about the international investors in Europe, but our local investors also in Latin America and Caribbean want to know what is the market benchmark in terms of investors as well. And maybe to finalize that, coming back to the investors, I found very interesting in some events I have been recently. 2 weeks ago, we had the CBI annual event, and I've been in also other events with ICMA. it is becoming more and more clear that investors, in addition to want to see the positive KPIs, they are looking to see what the corporates themselves are doing behind. So in addition to the challenges we have here that we're discussing today, that we need to demonstrate what is green and not, how can we make sure that the green investments really are green, more and more also we are being asked to see what are the underlying issuer doing institutionally, corporately, to manage those risks that are associated to social environment, how they have institutional, let's say, targets that demonstrate that whatever they are doing will be corporate-wide also sustainable. And that is interesting because we see then a push for going beyond just the KPIs and demonstrating that what we are doing is green, but also that there is, let's say, institutional commitment behind every issuer to do that. So from the side of IDB, of course, we see in Latin America huge potential. The market has been increasing exponentially. Also happy to talk about the report we're about to launch with CBI, but our market is still 2% of the global green and sustainable bond market. So we see a huge potential for increase, in some sectors, as Cesar was talking, water and sanitation, the forest and land use, biodiversity, and so on. But for that to happen, we need also to make sure not only anymore just from the framework preparation, but from the framework to the reporting, to the monitoring, and how can we help also governments to create enabling environments for basically this conversation about expectations of investors and the different taxonomies that are happening to be translated to the local markets in a way that can be relatively simple to navigate. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. So I just wanted to follow up with a question for Bianca. I mean, all the impact that IDB is having in the region, there is a lot of impact that Bnds has on Brazil. So what is Bnds doing to promote sustainable finance in Brazil? Maybe you can give us a few quick points.
Sure, I'm gonna try to be here very short, my answer, in order to consider the lack of time that we have. But I think that first of all, it's part of our mission as development bank, not only to incentive this, all the sustainable projects, green projects, but also to be viewed as a benchmark to the Brazilian companies in order to follow our example. So I would say that we are doing a lot in terms of efforts in order to improve our disclosure and also the reports that we are making public in order to show metrics and impacts of our performance in terms of not only the projects that we give support, but also all the benefits that we generate with our activity to the society as a whole. So we say that, I can say that in terms of portfolio, we could measure like 53% of our portfolio now is dedicated to the direct lines dedicated to green and sustainable. But we are also leading as a kind of investment banking of the federal government, a different kind of important projects in Brazil that are being responsible to attract new investments, but also to develop very relevant segments as sanitation and energy, clean energy. So I would say that we are also doing a lot in terms of creating new policies to give incentive to the green market. And I would say that we have now new products as linked loans that we provide benefits to our clients in terms of the interest rate according to some KPIs. We have the other products created by Bnds that is dedicated to make new investments in green notes, like green and infrastructure debentures in the local market. And we are also working in all these disclosure measures that I believe that it's going to be a very important benchmark. So recently we announced the ESG rating That was also a very interesting work that we did in connection in partnership with IDB. And we also have, as I mentioned before, we disclosure our sustainable framework, showing that we expect that our future funding alternatives are really gonna be focused on these kind of instruments. So I think that's a good example of how we expect to lead this discussion and this debate in Brazil, bring it to this agenda, all the companies and the other financial institutions as well.
Okay, perfect. This is very interesting, and I think now let's go back to Alfredo and see. I will just ask you a very pointed question about how you see the local asset managers and the asset owners like the AFPs and the Afores.
Y los que gestionan fondos y fondos de pensiones, ¿cómo van a seguir los pasos de los inversionistas europeas como el Santander Asset Management? Bueno, hemos tenido muchas conversaciones con planes de pensiones locales y actores locales y veo muchísimo interés.
Interested in understanding our approach, in understanding how we navigate the data issue, which is a significant issue in Latin America. Our approach in materiality when we in terms of each sector, but they are not in a stage of implementation that is comparable to the European investors, because regulators have not been as, I would say, aggressive or ambitious yet. So we think, I mean, in Europe, really, there is an articulation between, I mean, supranational regulation and national regulation and national players. And there's a lot of alignment, I think, in this situation. But in the region, we see a lot of interest, but we are not seeing regulators with the same ambition right now. No, we have to consider that. I mean, they are also coming out of very hard conditions. I mean, with COVID, etc., etc. I mean, I think that they're. But eventually this will go. Something very important to say is that it doesn't matter. We don't need local investors to apply the same rationales or approach in order to make a difference in the market. Because as Bianca was mentioning, for Brazilian issues, I mean, there's a lot of use of the international markets. So just because of the presence of the international investors, you will have an effect, a direct effect in the cost of funding of issuers that are much more aligned with international taxonomies than others that are not. So you will see this effect on the cost of funding even before, I mean, local investors jump in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, this is interesting. I mean, clearly, the local investors want to play and want to participate and are already having an effect. And I mean, the more the merrier, right? I mean, if you have investors like you showing the way and others learning from it, that is a very positive thing. And you have more and more PRI signatories in the region, so that is quite important. Mm-hmm. So let me go back to Cesar on Colombia. You are an early adopter on green finance taxonomy. Maybe can you give us a few pointers on your experience?
Absolutely. Let me mention three things. One is that you have to have a clear objective with your taxonomy. And in the case of Colombia, we have three objectives that are equally important. First, as we call it here in Colombia, we're creating the dictionary. We're defining what green means in Colombia. That's a #1 objective. Second, we want to develop capital markets. That may be different in relation with the European Union, but in emerging markets, particularly in Latin America, we want to develop green domestic capital markets. And 3, we want to narrow the financing gaps between our ambitions, commitments, and the money that needs to be mobilized to make them true. Colombia, for example, doubled down its ambitions of cutting carbon emissions. Previously, it was 20% reduction by 2030, and now it's 51% reduction by 2030, with a notion of carbon neutrality at 2050. How are we doing this? And to overcome the challenge that Alfredo was mentioning, we established 2 strategic alliances. One, the government, the Ministry of Finance, with its benchmarking power, with the provision of liquidity, and we established an alliance with the financial superintendents in Colombia, because they are going to be the ones issuing the circulars and implemented these principles also with the public sector and the private sector issuers in Colombia. So the taxonomy is jointly created and jointly published with our national financial superintendents. And we also did a strategic alliance with the World Bank Group. At the public sector level, we're receiving the technical support of the World Bank. At the private sector level, the superintendents is receiving the support of IFC. Let me finalize with what we have done similarly to Europe and what we have done different to Europe. Similar to Europe, we adopted a very open consultation system. The only way a taxonomy can be effective if it is legitimate, if it is delivered with the people, with the sectors, with the issuers, with all the stakeholders. And that's what we published, the same way that the European Union did with the white paper. Last Friday, we put up 7 technical papers for commentary: energy, buildings, waste, water, transport, agriculture, livestock, forestry. What also have we done similarly? We're focusing on green and not brown. We made a deliberate commitment: no nuclear energy in our green taxonomy, no hydrocarbons or derivatives. A big emphasis on electric cars and not in hybrids, for example. But what have we done differently? First, because 2/3 of the carbon emissions in Colombia come from the use of land, we put a big emphasis in the taxonomy, a whole pillar on the use of land that has to do with agriculture, with livestock, and with forestry. This is different because, as you will recall, the EU taxonomy couldn't reach a big consensus on this area, and use of land was sort of apart from the EU's taxonomy. In the case of Colombia, it's completely different. This is a cornerstone of our taxonomy. And finally, we're developing capital markets. We are going to be the first country in the Western Hemisphere that launches sovereign green bonds, not in international markets, but in domestic markets. And when we say domestic market, it's not a market of Colombians. 35% of our market is already internationalized. And we are inspired by the German model of sovereign twin bonds, so that investors will have greater transparency every day in primary markets and in secondary markets about the value of that greenium, if it will exist. It exists in the case of Germany, and we hope that it will exist in the case of Colombia.
Okay. That's interesting. That twin bond is super interesting. So thank you, Cesar. I want to, I mean, we're running a little bit out of time here. Maria, is there any point that you would like to make very quickly, so we have a little bit of additional time? Clearly, from your perspective, there are a lot of moving parts. Taxonomy is one point, but there are a lot of other things, and maybe you can give a very quick overview on that, Maria. Thank you, Cesar. This is super interesting.
Very happy to do so. And my main point here would be about the fact that we need to consider also on all this taxonomy and regulation. That's at least how IDB is seeing it in the region. The importance precisely, as Cesar was mentioning, of developing the local capital markets and helping the regulators to navigate all these different tendencies. I think there are different trends and different reasons why the taxonomy is used. You can have taxonomy for the bond issuance itself and the KPIs, but you also have more and more pressure on good practices and regulation, also about disclosure, for example, of ESG risk management and climate change risks. And we also have important references and needs for good code of governance, fiduciary duties administration, and others. So basically, what I would say is, from our side, the important message would be, how do we ensure better, let's say, transparency, but also comparability in the market relating to all that.
Okay, super. Thank you, Maria. And just maybe Claudia, you can close with a few points on what do you see as the healthy side effects of the of regulation like the EU taxonomy.
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. I think my fellow panelists said everything, all the important messages are there. So only to summarize, I think we have seen today that most of the countries in Latin America are already working under taxonomies. They also kind of explained the similarities and the differences between the EU taxonomy and their country taxonomies, but I think it's an important step, like Caroline said before, to have this international platform on sustainable finance, to work on standardization and to work on coherence, to go further. Another important point was transparency. I think it was mentioned many times, transparency, especially to investors and comparability to investors. I think Cesar made it very clear that this definitely is asked by the investors, and it gives also asset managers a judgment, a basis for judgment, whether this is a high level of CO2 reduction or a low level of CO2 reduction. So I think this is an important win also. And last but not least, clearly issuers will have access to cheaper funding if they adhere to the standards, and more adhere. And I found very interesting Maria saying that the increase of markets during COVID, because I think nobody was expecting this before, but that's a clear signal that investors really want to see more sustainability. And I think it's very valid what you said, Maria, that we also need to help regulators how to navigate through all this manual. And when it comes to the challenges, I think it's clear, and Bianca showed it very nicely from the Bnds example, that to create the link, also to create the link to the companies, especially to the SME companies, is a very challenging topic, and also to kind of broaden the system, not only green, but also the social aspects, which probably in Latin America are even more important than in Europe. And I think this probably also will be one of the first steps, because for exporting companies to Europe, it will be very crucial that they adhere to some extent to the reporting, because the companies in Europe will start asking it, because they have to report to their regulators what they are doing. So all in all, I think it really can become a win-win for all parties, and we have heard today many good arguments why it is so, and I really hope that we can move forward together in this direction. Thank you, Kurt. Super.
This is great. So great that we ran out of time, but I don't know if I can ask if we have time for at least one additional question. I think Piero, maybe you can give me some guidance if we have a few minutes for an additional question.
Yes, we do.
Okay. I mean, I think this is super interesting. I would like to ask a question to Alfredo. No, how do you see the asset management business evolving? I mean, it's clearly the whole sustainable finance is something that is super important, and the financial sector is really very, very important in the whole development of this, and investors seem to care. So I wanted to see your view, how that industry is evolving, and is this something that is central, or is it somewhat marginal? What's your feeling?
I think it's becoming central. Yes, it's becoming central, and you can see this on the amount of sustainability reports issued by companies. I mean, by issuers in the last year compared to 3 years ago. I mean, the pressure to disclose more, which means for many companies understanding more what they do or what they have been doing, and if there are ways of improving the way things have been done. So it's very interesting. They also look to set their own targets, and and we are seeing we are seeing a very important effort to communicate, because there are companies that have never been asked this kind of questions at the beginning, where I would say a bit like lost on their dialogue, the type of dialogue that they had with their investors for decades. So this is an issue that is becoming more and more important. So people have been bringing into the investor relation department people that have a more soundable understanding of sustainability issues, and even the big ones put some head of sustainability, to address directly these investors' concerns. So I see the issue growing to mainstream very, very fast.
Yeah, it is clear, and it is interesting, like somebody starting a career in finance, it seems that sustainability is an aspect that needs to be learned and needs to be incorporated into the skill set, because clearly either you are working in a bank, you are an investor, or you are a CFO. This is central, and at the end of the day, cost of capital has something to do with the issuance of debt or securities that where the underlined is an institution that is managing the environmental, social, and governance issues. No, and so
let me add just one thing. The cost of capital is very relevant, but also the access to the market, which is significant in terms of the credit risk, the risk of refinancing short-term maturity. When a company is recognized in the market as a very, very much a green player, the access to the market is very much facilitated. So this is something that probably the rating agencies are still hesitant in recognizing, but the market understands that. The market understands that a particular player is someone that us as ESG players want to have in their portfolios.
Correct. So anyway, I mean, I would love to have another couple of hours to talk about this, but we don't. And I would like to ask Isabel to guide us through the rest. I think we need to finish here, but I want to thank everyone. These are awesome comments. I really enjoyed working with all of you on this event, and I hope people liked it. Adelante, Isabel.
Thanks so much, Kurt. Perhaps we do have some time for one question. So from the list of questions that we have, there's a question for Bianca. What are the challenges and opportunities to develop sustainable finance in Brazil, and what role can Bnds play?
Thank you for the question, Isabel. I think that as I mentioned, Bnds, I think really we play a role to lead this agenda in Brazil, and not only give incentive to our clients to have access to Bnds funds following specific policies related to that, and giving incentive as well through the linked loans, as I mentioned. And also, I think that Brazil, as I already mentioned, really we have great opportunities, not only because we have great projects and we see a very interesting pipeline in the near future that is gonna increase a lot the number of projects related to this agenda. But also because we see as a great opportunity to also have an increased participation of the foreign investors in financing this. And in that sense, we really need to be linked with this agenda in order to be able to have this kind of match. So I believe that Bnds is going to keep in this important role, and structuring projects and sponsored projects that we believe is going to be relevant to co-financing alternatives as well, as we are doing with the sanitation, is a good example about the potential of our participation in this market.
Thank you so much, Bianca, for answering the question. Well, this seminar is coming to an end, sadly. We don't have more time to keep with the discussion. So I would like to give the floor back to Claudia and Edgardo for the closing remarks. So Claudia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Isabel. So I think, to me, it was very interesting. I personally learned a lot of things, and I think it was a very good discussion in the panel. Unfortunately, not so much time to have more questions from the plenary. So I think that's the lesson learned to me. It's such an important topic that probably next time we should arrange for more time to exchange between all the participants. So thanks a lot on behalf of KFW and ALIDE for participating today. Thanks a lot to all my fellow panelists, and special thank also to Kurt and to Isabel and to Piero for organizing this today. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Kurt. And well, as you mentioned, there is a lot to say. There were so many questions that we had behind, but don't worry, because this webinar was so important and so interesting that we are going to prepare a paper on this with the main important things you have shared with us, like what Caroline said, the overview of the taxonomy, and trying to provide and for the investors, and not only the investors, for the creators to analyze what is green and what is not green. So this is very important in this time. Luckily I don't have time enough to record and to mention all the things you have shared with us, and I only want to thanks to all of you, because now we know that in Colombia they are going to issue a new taxonomy, so it's quite interesting, and we are aware and we are really proud of what the IDB is doing with the green bond platform that they announced in our last National Assembly in ALIDE, and this is part of the things we do in ALIDE to put everybody together. And thanks a lot, and hope to meet you again for this interesting meeting. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Gracias. Obrigado. Bye.